Just before everything fell apart, Lucy Landry's marriage was already quietly unraveling. By mid-2009, 7 years into a relationship marked by resentment and control, Lucy had begun living a double life, one rooted not in her home, but online. A reconnection on Facebook with an old-school friend reignited something dangerous, something that would soon turn private dissatisfaction into open conflict. What followed wasn't just betrayal. It was a slow-burning collision of jealousy, illness, money, and humiliation. As arguments intensified and bitterness took hold, the walls of their home became witnesses to a marriage in free fall. Words turned cruel, accusations turned personal, and on one February night, a confrontation spiraled beyond repair. By the time the shouting stopped, the damage was irreversible, and what happened next would leave one woman dead and force investigators to confront a truth far darker than a marriage breaking down. Support the channel by liking the video, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and subscribing for more stories. It truly helps. Thank you. Let's dive into today's case. Lucy Davies was born in 1971 in the county of Rhondda, England. She was the daughter of Roger and Andrea Davies, who were also proud parents to a younger daughter, Anna. The family lived in a small, close-knit community made up largely of social housing, set against a backdrop of striking mountain scenery. Lucy enjoyed a particularly happy childhood. She and her sister Anna shared similar interests and personalities, and the two were inseparable. Their parents often spoke about Lucy's infectious sense of joy, a quality that stood out from an early age. At primary school, Lucy was known for her outgoing, warm, and likable nature. She quickly became a favorite among both teachers and classmates. Alongside her charming personality, she was also recognized for her natural beauty, which made her one of the most popular and admired girls at school. Outside of academics, Lucy and Anna shared a deep love for ponies. Aware of their enthusiasm, their father surprised them both by enrolling them in the local riding club, an experience that only deepened their bond and added to Lucy's seemingly idyllic early life. This sporting activity instilled discipline in both girls, while also allowing their natural talent to shine. As a result, they earned the opportunity to represent their riding club in numerous events and competitions. By the time Lucy began secondary school, she had already distinguished herself as an exceptional rider. But her energy and passion extended far beyond the riding track. A remarkably versatile young woman, Lucy also took up flute and piano lessons, devoting long hours to practice in order to master both instruments. Her dedication quickly paid off. Within a year, she had developed an impressive and detailed command of classical music. Thanks to this achievement, Lucy was accepted into a youth orchestra and also joined her school's choir. As often happens during adolescence, romance soon entered her life. Lucy grew particularly close to a boy named Gareth Jenkins. However, she chose to keep the relationship quiet, preferring that their bond remain a secret. In 1989, after completing secondary school, Lucy was determined to pursue a career in music. With that ambition in mind, she enrolled in a bachelor's degree program at the University of Warwick. It marked the beginning of a new and promising chapter in her life. Her long-term goal was to become a teacher and devote herself to musical education. However, things did not unfold as she had expected. Although her passion for music remained strong, Lucy found herself dissatisfied with the direction of the degree program. Feeling unfulfilled, she made the difficult decision to change course and abandon her original plan. Instead, she chose to study urban planning. It was during this period of transition that Lucy met Gray McAllister. The two quickly discovered that they shared a remarkably similar outlook on life. Beyond their mutual love of art and common interests, what truly solidified their bond was an extravagant, matching sense of humor, one that perfectly complemented the other. Their relationship developed effortlessly, and as they began making plans for the future, Lucy decided it was time to introduce Gray to her parents. For Roger and Andrea, The meeting could not have gone better. They were immediately convinced that Gray was the right man for their daughter. So confident were they in the relationship that they made a significant gesture of support. They purchased a house for Lucy in the city of Coventry, northwest of London. The gift not only freed her from the instability of renting and frequent moves, but also reflected her parents' hope that she would soon settle down and start a family. Shortly after moving in, Lucy invited Gray to share the new home. As they continued their studies, their lives took a major turn in 1995 when a young couple welcomed their first child, a son they named James. Lucy chose to take a break from university to care for their newborn, while Gray pressed on with his studies. To help cover household expenses, he also took a job working the night shift at the city's postal sorting office. Over the following months, this new routine began to take a toll on Lucy. Spending long hours alone at home, devoted entirely to caring for the baby and rarely seeing her partner, she was slowly overcome by boredom and isolation. Looking for distraction and adult conversation, she turned to internet chat rooms. In this online world, Lucy began seeking out new connections. One night, while engaged in lively discussions across several chat rooms, she encountered Harold Landry. Harold was 53 years old and originally from the United States. He had grown up in a financially struggling family in Louisiana, one of 12 siblings. From an early age, Harold understood that if he wanted more out of life, he would have to earn it through his own determination and effort. Driven by a strong work ethic, he dedicated himself to escaping poverty. His opportunity came when he recognized a crucial truth about the oil industry. Success didn't lie in owning oil wells, but in providing the vital infrastructure that supported those who did. Acting on this insight, Harold began to carve out a path that would ultimately change his life. He went on to found his own company, one focused exclusively on the design and manufacture of hydraulic equipment for major oil corporations across the southern United States. Just as he had anticipated, the business proved enormously successful. Over time, Harold amassed a vast fortune, eventually reaching billionaire status. With his wealth secured, Harold divided his time between his eccentric hobbies and a luxury property on the island of Cozumel in Mexico. On a personal level, his life was far less settled. He had been married and divorced twice, and from those marriages he had children, though their exact number and identities were never made public. What was known, however, was that Harold ensured his children wanted for nothing. One particularly telling episode occurred in 1992. Single once again, Harold became involved with a married woman who was 20 years his junior. Neither her husband nor her family stood in his way. Harold focused all of his charm and calculated seduction on her, and ultimately, he succeeded in winning her over. On February 6, 1994, Harold picked her up for an evening drive through New Orleans. For the occasion, the couple had hired a babysitter. After the night came to an end, Harold accompanied his lover back to her home and then offered to drive the babysitter to hers. No one appeared concerned about the possibility that the woman's husband might discover the affair or how a betrayed man might react. But that was exactly what happened. Unbeknownst to them, the husband had been watching his wife closely, monitoring her every move. Once the babysitter said her goodbyes, he followed Harold's car. A few minutes later, Harold became aware that a vehicle was tailing him. Almost instinctively, he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the firearm he routinely carried. When both cars came to a stop at a red light, the situation rapidly spiraled out of control. Events that the babysitter would later recount in chilling detail. Harold then brandished a revolver and fired at the betrayed husband. The bullet severed an artery in the man's neck and damaged a nerve connected to his vocal cord. The victim, identified as Chris Price, collapsed onto the pavement, bleeding heavily from a wound. By sheer luck, a hospital was located directly across the street. Emergency treatment was immediate, and doctors were able to save Chris's life. Harold, meanwhile, was arrested at the scene and charged with attempted murder. The trial did not take place until 1997. In his opening statement, the defense attorney argued that Chris Price was merely the unfortunate victim of a tragic and sordid affair. Regarding Harold's actions, The defense claimed he had acted out of fear and in self-defense. This strategy proved effective. The jury, made up of 4 men and 8 women, ultimately convicted Harold of the lesser charge of aggravated assault rather than attempted murder. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. After filing an appeal, Harold was granted probation. In exchange, he was required to pay a $500 fine and complete a period of community service. Although he had hoped to be fully exonerated, Harold publicly thanked his attorney, Pat, for his efforts. Over time, the 2 men developed a close friendship. Not long afterward, Harold and Chris Price reached a civil settlement for an undisclosed amount. By the time Harold began communicating with Lucy, he was living in Covington and remained wealthy enough that he did not need to work. Harold was unusually open about his life. He spoke candidly about his business dealings, his past relationships, and even his legal troubles. Rather than deterring Lucy, these revelations only heightened her fascination with him. What followed was an intense and engaging online romance, with Harold promising her a lifestyle that was difficult to resist. His persistence and his persuasive charm eventually paid off. When Lucy finally asked Gray to end their relationship, Harold's path was clear. With no rival standing in his way, no threat like the one that had once ended so violently with Chris, he was free to move forward. With everything seemingly in his favor, Harold traveled to England in the early 2000s to meet Lucy in person. During the visit, Lucy introduced him to her parents as her boyfriend. Roger and Andrea were taken aback by the significant age difference, but they chose to respect their daughter's decision and did not oppose the relationship. Harold felt fulfilled and incredibly fortunate to have Lucy in his life. Determined to make her happy, he spared no expense in surprising her, showering her with lavish gifts and indulging nearly every desire she expressed. By this point, Harold was deeply in love and already planning to propose marriage. But he didn't want just any proposal. He wanted it to be unforgettable, set in the perfect place. And to achieve that, he began laying careful plans. Harold arranged a trip to Mexico and invited Lucy, her young son James, and even Gray to join them. The destination was carefully chosen. By that point, Mexico had become Harold's favorite place in the world. Adding to his sense of comfort, his longtime friend Pat, the attorney who had once defended him, owned an apartment near Harold's residence there. Before the trip, Harold purchased a diamond ring and excitedly shared his plans with Pat. Despite his enthusiasm, Pat quietly harbored doubts about Harold's future fiancée. During the trip, those concerns deepened. Pat noticed that Lucy spent a significant amount of time in Gray company, something Harold appeared completely blind to. Nevertheless, Harold moved forward with his plan. He proposed, and Lucy accepted without hesitation. In mid-2003, the couple celebrated their marriage. Shortly after the wedding, Harold surprised Lucy once again by purchasing a $1 million property in an exclusive neighborhood in Worcestershire. Set in a peaceful rural area, their marriage seemed to begin under ideal circumstances. The sense of harmony was reinforced by friendly neighbors, including Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy, with whom Harold and Lucy quickly formed a warm and close friendship. Not long after the wedding, the newlyweds welcomed their first daughter, whom they named Harriet. Her birth filled both Lucy and Harold with joy. From that moment on, Harold devoted himself to the little girl with unwavering energy and commitment. Just as meaningful was the bond he formed with James. Harold treated him as his own son, showing him affection and care without distinction. To outsiders, the family appeared loving and complete. But as time passed, the early bliss of the marriage began to fade. Gradually, Harold's demands toward Lucy increased, and her growing moodiness mirrored the pressure she felt. In his view, Lucy was expected to adapt constantly to his preferences and assume a submissive role within the relationship. Lucy, however, had very different expectations. Tension quickly surfaced. Lucy was outspoken and unafraid to voice her thoughts, while Harold was unwilling to compromise. With both possessing volatile personalities, their arguments frequently escalated into explosive confrontations, followed by periods of reconciliation once tempers cooled. Even moments that had once brought joy, such as family holidays, became increasingly overshadowed by conflict, as arguments intruded on nearly every aspect of their shared life. Meanwhile, James bore witness to the slow collapse of his mother and stepfather's relationship. To the dismay of their neighbors, the arguments, often stretching on for hours, became a grim and familiar soundtrack in the household. Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy were well aware that the couple had developed a habit of heavy drinking, and they understood that alcohol often acted as the spark that ignited the shouting matches and bitter complaints. When Lucy and Harold finally unleashed all their anger, the fights were usually followed by long periods of silence. During those stretches, the neighbors sensed a temporary return of peace. By mid-2009, Lucy's life took another turn. Through social media, she reconnected with Gareth Jenkins, whom she had not spoken to since their platonic relationship in secondary school. The two quickly fell into long conversations, chatting for hours and only pausing to attend to their separate responsibilities. After Harold went to sleep each night, Lucy remained glued to her computer screen. Before long, Harold realized that his unhappy wife had turned to the very same escape route through which she had once found him. He had little doubt that she was searching for a replacement. Rather than confront her, Harold chose distance. He traveled to Mexico and stayed there for a period of time. In his absence, Lucy seized the opportunity to invite Gareth to stay with her. In the autumn of 2009, Harold returned to England, believing that his absence might have given their marriage a chance to heal. Instead, the moment he walked through the door, Lucy asked him for a divorce. At first, Harold was devastated, but within a few weeks, he began a new relationship of his own. He met a woman online who lived nearby and went by the name Rachel. As both pursued new romances, divorce negotiations moved forward in parallel. As is often the case, the process quickly became contentious, particularly over the issue of the house. Lucy expected to keep the home, arguing that it was necessary to provide stability and a roof over her children's heads. Harold, however, refused to compromise. For him, the house was non-negotiable. Instead, he offered Lucy a financial settlement so she could purchase a smaller apartment on her own. At the same time, he made another decisive move. He removed Lucy entirely from his will. When Lucy learned of her husband's decisions, she erupted in rage. Her resentment and hatred toward Harold intensified, and she began sharing details of his past with her son James, holding nothing back. Amid the escalating conflict and the emotional strain she was under, the situation inside the household became increasingly volatile. Gareth soon invited Lucy to spend a few days with him in Wales. When she returned to her familiar surroundings, she no longer felt any need to hide or downplay the long phone conversations with her new partner. At the same time, both Lucy and Harold had fallen into heavy alcohol consumption. Fueled by drink, their arguments escalated to alarming levels, creating a violent and unbearable atmosphere for the children trapped in the middle. On the afternoon of Monday, February 1st, 2010, Harold drank several glasses of wine. Later that evening, he received a package that had been mistakenly delivered to his address, but was intended for their neighbor, Stephen Kennedy. Around 9 p.m., when Stephen returned home from work, he found a delivery notice informing him that the parcel had been left with the Landrys. Seeing that their lights were on, he went over to retrieve it. Harold invited Stephen inside and poured him a glass of wine. After greeting Lucy and exchanging a few polite words, Stephen quickly noticed how intoxicated his host was. He collected his package, excused himself, and left. Not long after Stephen's departure, Lucy and Harold launched into another chaotic argument, this time over a piece of furniture Lucy planned to buy for her move. James reacted instinctively, drawing on years of experience witnessing their fights. But this time, the confrontation escalated beyond shouting and crossed into physical violence. During the struggle, Harold grabbed a kitchen utensil and struck Lucy on the cheek. At that point, there was no hiding what was happening. James rushed into the room and found his mother injured. Acting immediately, he called the police and then turned his attention to protecting his younger sister, making sure she was safe. Not long afterward, Lucy fled the house with her children, desperate for help. The first place that came to her mind was Stephen's home. But as she headed in that direction, Harold caught up with her. Armed with a knife, he attacked Lucy, inflicting multiple wounds. When he was done, he left her bleeding beneath a bush in the garden and walked away. Drawn outside by Lucy's screams, Stephen stepped into his yard. Within seconds, he discovered his neighbor lying there. At first, he believed she was unconscious, but he quickly realized how serious her condition was. Police officers, responding to the emergency call, arrived at the scene shortly afterward. They immediately summoned paramedics and began searching the surrounding area for the attacker. Instead, they found the children, terrified and hiding in the backyard, swallowed by the darkness. Once the paramedics arrived, they worked as quickly as possible. Lucy was rushed to the hospital, fighting for her life. Very shortly after arriving at the hospital, Lucy's heart stopped. She cannot be saved. Meanwhile, Harold went to Rachel's house and confessed that something terrible had happened, though he offered no details. He then handed her 3 bank drafts totaling $40,000, a sum of cash, the keys to his car, and several signed blank checks. After that, he set off back home. By that time, multiple police patrols were actively searching for him. Eventually, they located Harold walking along a road and proceeded to arrest him. Roger and Andrea were overcome with grief upon learning the tragic news. In a statement released by the police, they asked for privacy and respect during a time of unimaginable sorrow over the loss of their daughter. They added that, for now, they had nothing further to say to the media, choosing instead to focus all their energy on caring for their grandchildren. A forensic examination later confirmed that Lucy had died from multiple stab wounds to the chest. With this evidence, and James serving as a first-hand witness to the events, investigators had a clear basis to build the case against Harold. On February 5, 2010, Harold appeared in court and was formally charged with murder. The trial itself began in early February 2011 and was presided over by Judge David Fawson. Pat, who had previously defended Harold in an earlier case, was no longer involved. This time, the defense was handled by attorney Andy Childs. Despite the daunting nature of the case, Childs argued that Harold had been provoked by his wife's fury, claiming she left him with no alternative but to act as he did. During his initial testimony, Harold broke down in tears. He confessed that he loved Lucy and expressed deep remorse for his actions. Following the strategy outlined by his lawyer, he ultimately admitted to involuntary manslaughter, insisting that Lucy had pushed him to the limit. To underscore the brutality of the attack, the prosecution presented a highly detailed animation illustrating the multiple injuries Lucy had suffered. The graphic presentation left a profound and shocking impression on everyone in the courtroom. Finally, on February 24, 2011, after less than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Harold Landry guilty of murdering his wife, Lucy Landry, who was 38 at the time of her death. Harold, by then, was 64 years old. The following day, Judge David Fawson imposed the sentence. He delivered harsh words for Harold, describing the attack as indescribable and unforgivable. The judge rejected Harold's claims that he had been provoked by Lucy, dismissing them as a vain attempt to evade responsibility. Consequently, Harold was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 16 years before becoming eligible for parole, a point at which he would already be over 80 years old. Lucy's loved ones expressed gratitude not only for the resolution, but also for the judge's remarks, which they felt perfectly echoed their own feelings. They noted that, while the sentence could not undo the loss, it offered a small measure of closure. They also acknowledged the painful truth that no number of years in prison could bring Lucy back, and that they would have to find a way to live with that reality. Harold, meanwhile, continued to proclaim his innocence and expressed hope that he could appeal the sentence in the future. This concludes the case. As always, I appreciate your support. Subscribing, liking, and sharing helps me continue creating content. Thank you, and see you soon.